Well, I know that I'm not lonely. At least for the moment. All right. Well, thank you for your patience listening to the other witnesses. And why don't you identify yourselves and then proceed with your testimony. And so we'll hear from whoever will present testimony, and then we'll proceed with our questions. Make sense, right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and I appreciate all of you being here. So why don't you first identify yourselves and then proceed.
My name is Maureen Helmer, and I'm here representing the Cable Telecommunications Association of New York.
I remember you, and I know you.
Allison Ellis, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs for Frontier Communications.
Hello.
Licia Eve with Verizon.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you again, sir.
I'm Keith Clemens. I'm the Northeast Region General Counsel for Verizon.
Hi, I'm Bob Puckett, President of the New York State Telecommunications Association.
Mr. Whalen, are you joining us up here or at the desk, or what are you?
Available for questions.
All right, fine. Okay. Well, whoever would like to go first is welcome to do so.
I think Verizon.
All right. It's a big company. You can go first.
Happy to do so, Mr. Chairman. Good
right.
afternoon, Chairman Brennan, members of the committees, and other members of the New York State Assembly. I mentioned my name is Licia Eve. I'm the Vice President for State Government Affairs for New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut for Verizon, and you've met my colleague, Keith Clemens. Let me first say at the outset that we do have lengthier written comments prepared for the record, but I will keep my remarks brief. But I do want to say that we do appreciate the opportunity to share our views and appreciate the committees holding this hearing. How we communicate today has been transformed. The last decade in particular has seen major transformations in the telecommunications industry. When many of the members here, whether you are young or seasoned, were elected to the Assembly, the world was a very different place, particularly in the communications space. There were no smartphones, no iPad, no tablets, no Facebook, no Twitter, no Netflix, no Apple TV. And the internet as we know it today was just a vision. Cable providers were not offering digital voice and internet service. Voice over internet protocol, commonly referred to as VoIP services, services such as Skype and Vonage and MagicJack, were barely heard of. Telephones were not a source of video entertainment, and not many people would have imagined giving up a landline in favor of just using a cell phone. So many of these communication services have become central to our daily lives. These innovations have also been critical tools for social change here in our state, in our country, and around the world. I am proud to work for a company whose unmatched ingenuity, foresight, commitment, and investments have helped make this change possible. In fact, since 2000, Verizon has invested more than $22 billion in its wireline infrastructure in New York, with over close to $2 billion invested in both the wireline and wireline networks in New York State in 2015 alone. This is one of the reasons why the National Progressive Policy Institute named the Verizon Group of companies once again as one of its top, and I quote, investment heroes among all U.S. companies across all industries. At the same time that these technological advancements have been taking place, market forces have opened the door to competitive alternatives. Indeed, as the committees are aware, last June, the New York State Public Service Commission conducted an assessment of the telecommunications industry, and I know many of you heard members of the commission staff speak about this earlier. The commission recognized, and I quote, "The last decade has produced radical change throughout the telecommunications industry. The communications landscape in New York State and across the nation continues its rapid transition to new, more powerful and diverse technologies. Today's networks are providing more advanced and more mobile services at faster speeds to consumers and supplanting traditional forms of telephone and cable television service. In examining these trends, the Commission recognized that consumers now have, quote, have at their disposal a wide array of services and service providers for their communications needs, and that they have migrated to competitive network platforms and providers in significant numbers. The Commission went on to say that traditional telephone companies have lost significant amounts of market share to competitors. Lastly, the Commission noted that providers such as Verizon New York, although facing significant financial challenges due to these developments, continues to invest heavily, and that's a quote, in New York State infrastructure. A wide variety of data supports this. I won't go into detail, but some of you may be familiar with the report that was just released by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control. The report basically said that the number of American homes with only wireless telephones continues to grow, and that, quote, nearly 1/2 of American homes had only wireless telephones during the first half of 2015. The facts with respect to New York are even more stark. These aren't our facts, they are the facts, and the Commission noted them at length in its report. Just to briefly highlight some key ones of interest, I believe, to the committees. About a decade ago, according to the Commission, New York had 12 million traditional landline connections in service. Today, 4 million lines. About a decade ago, New York had more than 5 million wireless telephones in service. Today, more than 21 million wireless phones are in service, 5 times the number of traditional landlines. New York had fewer than 1 million or so New Yorkers subscribed to service over cable lines, represented by some of my peers at this table. Today, nearly 5 million customers subscribe to Internet Protocol, what we refer to as IP phone service, instead of traditional telephone service. New York had less than 2 million broadband connections serving New York consumers, primarily over telephone and cable systems. Today, some 19 million broadband connections are in service in our state, provided to consumers over a wide range of technology platforms and network providers. This transformation, it can't be understated, its significance. It also has had a significant financial impact on Verizon New York. Verizon New York, which is the historic affiliate company of Verizon Communications, that has in fact invested billions and employs thousands in our state. Verizon in New York has lost a substantial portion of its historic landline customer base and revenues to competitors, some of whom are here, predominantly competitors using using technologies that are beyond the jurisdiction of the Public Service Commission. At year-end 2000, Verizon provided nearly 12 million local exchange access lines to customers. At year-end 2014, that number declined to well under 3 million. So 12 million to under 3 million. As a result of these and other developments, the company's operating revenues in New York State declined by about 1/3 over the same period. In fact, the net income of Verizon New York was negative $1.74 billion in 2014. Its 2014 net cash flow from investing and operating activities was negative $940 million. Verizon, however, welcomes the competitive challenge. It's responded to that challenge aggressively by continuing to innovate and continuing to invest in New York's communications infrastructure. Most important, we are focused on meeting our customers' needs because we want to keep as many and get as many new ones as possible. And we focus on that every day by trying to do better and meeting those customers' needs more quickly. That is our central mission. We do this with great employees and investments in New York that are simply unmatched by any communications company or any technology company in the state. The Verizon companies collectively comprise one of the largest private employers in the state, with 21,000 employees who are compensated at levels much higher than those prevalent in the industry. Indeed, the average annual compensation and benefit package of our installation and repair technicians in New York City is more than $160,000 with no college degree required. We are the largest publicly owned company in the nation that chooses to continue to be headquartered in New York. We have more than 31,000 retirees living in the state, provide millions of dollars to philanthropic organizations that work hard every day to improve the lives of New Yorkers. And we, in fact, comprise we're one of the largest real property taxpayers. We pay over $300 million in property taxes in 2014 alone. Last but certainly not least, Verizon supports more than 5,000 businesses, most of them small and medium sized, across New York State, with $2.5 billion in spending with those businesses, including hundreds of millions to minority and women-owned firms. As the former general counsel of Empire State Development and the former Deputy Secretary of Economic Development for our state, I am especially proud of these investments and this commitment. Verizon, in fact, is a charter member of the Billion Dollar Roundtable, one of only 21 companies across the nation that conducts more than $1 billion with MWBE firms each and every year. And last year, I am so proud to say, Verizon didn't do one, didn't do two, three, four, but more than $5 billion with MWBE firms across our country. We're also proud of our employee diversity. We've been named, among other accomplishments, on Working Mother's 100 Best Companies for Women, a top 50 employer by Workforce Diversity magazine. And I know many of you have focused on the needs of our veterans. I'm also extraordinarily proud to say that Military Times has named Verizon as the number one company in the country for recruiting and hiring veterans and service members. Today, within Verizon, we have 12,000 veterans and service members strong who are our fellow employees. The Verizon companies also are at the forefront of innovation. Verizon landline companies were the first to offer fiber-based voice, data, and video services on a mass market basis. Our wireless business has always been a leader in the industry with the fastest and most reliable wireless networks. And now Verizon Communications continues to blaze the trail, leading to the transformation of wireless services through the implementation of 5G technology. I want to end my remarks, Mr. Chairman and the ranking member, by emphasizing what I noted at the outset. The communications industry has changed dramatically and is more intensely competitive than ever before in New York and across the nation. It has been extraordinary, and it has benefited consumers tremendously. Now, more than ever before, consumers are in the driver's seat to select the products, the services, the technologies, and the overall value propositions that meet their individual needs. Recognizing the changed communications landscape and to support innovation and investment, 36 states across this country have significantly updated their telecommunications laws to reflect this new competitive reality. Unfortunately, while some modest steps have been made in New York, a state that I was proud to serve for many years, is not among them. While New York State is typically a leader in so many areas, thanks to so many of you, its telecommunications laws, many of which are decades old, are woefully out of date and need to be updated to reflect today's ever-changing communications landscape. The lack of significant change, and even worse, efforts to revert policy back decades will only serve to stifle innovation and investment, making New York less attractive for business and harming rather than benefiting consumers. We look forward to working with you, Mr. Chairman, and all the members of both committees to help New York resume its rightful place as a public policy leader in the technology and communications arena. Thank you again for this opportunity to appear before you, and after my colleagues, my peers, and the other companies have had a chance to present, we'll be happy to answer any questions that any of you may have. Thank you again.
Thank you. Ms. Helmers?
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair, members of the Assembly, staff. We do appreciate the opportunity to appear here today on behalf of the Cable Telecommunications Association of New York. There are several representatives of the member.
Do you have written testimony?
We do, and we did provide it.
Okay, all right.
I am joined here by several members or employees of the member companies, but in particular to answer any specific questions that you may have of the companies. Rory Whalen is here on behalf of Time Warner Communications, and Lee Schroeder is here on behalf of Cablevision.
Right.
The Cable Telecommunications Association, or CTANI members, have invested billions of dollars of private capital in infrastructure that has supported New York's economy, driven broadband investment by new and incumbent providers, and enhance the quality of life for millions of New York's consumers. Satania is pleased to have the opportunity to appear before the two committees to discuss the timely issues of telecommunications and broadband policy as articulated in the PSC staff's assessment of telecommunications services. The investments by cable companies and other competitive providers have been made possible by the pro-competitive policies implemented over the past several decades by the New York State Public Service Commission as enabled by the authority delegated to it by the legislature. These policies have attracted private investment by opening markets for providers to invest in and widely deploy advanced networks, provided consumers an array of innovative products and packages to choose from, and allowed competition rather than legacy regulation to make New York a national leader. The result, as department staff found, is that New York consumers have at their disposal a wide array of services and service providers for their communications needs. In addition, the cable industry has been an economic engine for the state, creating jobs in the communications sector and luring investment from other sectors dependent on first-class communications networks. Where issues of access to communications service remain, we respectfully suggest they ought to be examined through this pro-competitive, consumer-focused lens. As New York continues to consider the appropriate regulatory posture going forward, we offer two suggested guiding principles. First, the same market forces that have made New York a leader are better suited to address remaining challenges as opposed to regulation that attempts to replace market forces and consumer choice with government mandates. Second, for providers to be able to continue to attract the private capital needed to continuously update and expand their networks, there needs to be a predictable and stable regulatory environment that minimizes the risk and hence the cost of such investments. New York has been a success story in broadband deployment and increasing speeds and related network investment. Staff's report found that 95% of New York consumers have access to 3 or more platforms or providers of broadband service at speeds greater than or equal to 5 megabits per second. Broadband providers include incumbent local exchange companies or ILECs, competitive LECs, cable operators, wireless carriers, wireless internet service providers, and to a limited extent satellite providers. The cable industry was among the first sectors to invest significant private capital in the state to facilitate broadband deployment. The billions of dollars of private investment in cable networks in New York was attracted by the state's pro-investment regulatory climate, and the companies have continued to invest in their broadband networks, not only in densely populated areas, but in the more rural counties of upstate New York that had previously been underserved or had no service at all. New York cable companies have led broadband network investment for decades, providing the most robust internet connections to homes and businesses that have largely driven the explosion in broadband adoption across New York and the country, and have revolutionized business, entertainment, and communications. As a result of this investment, both Cablevision and Time Warner offer multiple robust, high-speed tiers to address consumers' evolving needs and demands. In addition to providing high-speed broadband access to New Yorkers, cable companies have expanded the ability of consumers to have access to broadband outside the home. Cable operators have deployed well over 1 million indoor and outdoor Wi-Fi hotspots in the tri-state area, including at key community and public locations such as parks and railroad stations, providing consumers with ubiquitous connectivity and additional value, and helping consumers reduce their cellular bills. There is robust competition among various platforms for consumers' video dollars as well. As a staff report noted, consumers have near ubiquitous video service availability from a number of providers and over-the-top providers such as Netflix, HBO Now, Hulu, and Amazon Prime, which utilize customers' existing wired and wireless broadband connections and offer an alternative to cable operators' video offerings. Indeed, Netflix recently announced that it now has more than 70 million subscribers, more than even the largest U.S. cable operator. The staff report indicated that the adoption rate for these providers is approximately 40%, second only to cable video services.
I'm sorry, Ms. Humber, where are you in your testimony here?
I upset my pages because I blew up the type because I've got baby boomer eyes. It's probably around page 4. It's under the section described as video.
Okay, got it. All right. Sorry.
Okay.
Keep going.
And now I'm on to voice. Consumers in New York also have multiple choices in platforms and providers of voice service, again, including ILEX, CLEX, cable companies, wireless, over-the-top VoIP providers, and fiber. The staff report indicates that 95% of customers in New York have access to at least 5 platforms. Cable operators have played a significant role in bringing competitive voice services to all areas of the state by offering VoIP to its customers, representing the first robust facilities-based voice competition for monopoly telephone incumbents, resulting in tremendous savings for New York residents and business. The United States' transition to a knowledge-based economy has been dependent in large part on investment in broadband infrastructure. New York State is a prime example of how economic growth is stimulated by investments in broadband infrastructure. The state's progressive regulatory approach has contributed to New York's position as a national leader in broadband deployment. Maintaining this increased broadband investment is key to New York's future. New York's continued economic growth will depend not only upon who has access to broadband networks, but also on whether those networks are sufficiently robust to support experimentation at the edge of the networks, not only now but into the future. Demand for broadband services will continue to increase sharply in the coming years, which will require increased investment in infrastructure. But in order to meet increased demand as well as advancements in technology, reinvestment will need to be cyclical and not just a one-time infusion. New York should also ensure that any funds devoted to broadband deployment do not inadvertently impede ongoing infrastructure investment. Programs such as Connect New York and the New York Broadband Fund, done in partnership with carriers such as the cable companies, are helpful in bringing broadband to unserved communities, and the companies look forward to continuing to work with the administration to do so. Satani commends the Assembly committees for their interest in understanding the complex changes that are taking place in the voice, broadband, and video markets in New York. The cable industry has played an integral role in developing these modern networks under a regulatory framework in the state that has encouraged private, non-ratepayer investment. Satani respectfully encourages support for the Commission's consideration of further lightening of regulation on competitive services as appropriate, and requests that the legislature and the Commission send a clear message to the competitive market that New York intends to continue its pro-competitive policies in the state. Thank you, and I look forward to responding to any questions you have.
Thank you. Mr. Puckett?
Is this on?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you, Chairman Brennan and Ranking Member Corwin. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read my testimony. I would just like to make a few key points. Many of the points I wanted to make have already been said here today, so I'll just give you a couple of other thoughts from my perspective. We're the original telephone association, NYSTA. We were established in 1921, and while we're hearing today from some of the largest providers, actually there are 40 incumbent local exchange carriers serving all of New York, ranging in size, of course, from Verizon down to companies serving less than 1,000 customers in some of the most rural areas of the state. We've had a lot of discussion today about broadband. I know there's frustration here in the room, but I would point out that Akamai is a firm that does a study and releases a study every quarter of the status of internet in both the country as well as the world. New York ranks in the top 10.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the name of that group?
Akamai, A-K-A-M-A-I.
Is that in your testimony there?
I believe it is.
All right, keep going.
Anyway, they, in the second quarter 2015 report that they have issued, New York was ranked in the top 10 in the country in both average speeds and adoption for broadband. Certainly there's a long way to go. I agree with that. Our organization, we support efforts such as the new New York Broadband Grant Program to try to improve on the situation in the state. But I think, as you've heard from our two previous presenters, quite a bit has been done in New York, and there's areas of upstate New York that more will be done, hopefully, with this new grant program. And that, combined with federal funding programs to deploy broadband, the Connect America Fund, I think certainly will move the needle, if you will. We talked a little bit about regulation here. A couple of items I'd like to point out. We continue to support some proposals put forth in 2014 by Governor Cuomo. They were modest proposals. One would allow the PSC to forbear from applying certain regulations that, believe it or not, were put on the books over 100 years ago, back when they talked in terms of telephone and telegraph. So here we are 100 years later, still discussing laws on the books from 1910 and 1912. The other issue we think is important that, again, the governor put forth in 2014 was to try to modify the franchising process. If you want to get into the video business, you have to negotiate with every village, town, city in the state, and then you have to go to the Public Service Commission to get their approval to provide video service. And video is a key component of a broadband network. You want to be able to offer as many services as you can over that network to help pay for the cost of providing and building that network. The governor's proposal would simply give the PSC the option of granting automatically franchises in 45 days. They can always take longer if they feel there's issues that need to be addressed, but at least it would help in the day-to-day franchising process. And for a lot of my smaller companies who have to hire consultants and lawyers to go negotiate with villages and towns and then come to the PSC, it's quite a costly proposition. In the long term, we think the video franchise process should be administered on the state level, just as telecommunications was. It might be interesting to note that in order to spur competition in the telecommunications marketplace, the PSC simply says you file for a certificate of public convenience and necessity. It's a 2-page form. They approve it. You can then provide telephone service anywhere at any time that you want. Compared with trying to get into the video business, you still have to go through the process that's been around for 40, 50 years. So we think in the long term that's the direction the state should move in. Those are the couple of items that I wanted to mention, and certainly answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Puckett.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Brennan, for inviting Frontier Communications to provide testimony today.